Warning, warning, dual citizens. I'm Peter Dutton, and in a government I lead, I'm going to ask every Australian to vote on whether ministers like me should have the right to deport dual citizens like you to your other country of citizenship. That's right, I'm asking a country of immigrants if I can send them back to where they came from, even if you grew here and you didn't even flew here. You know what, when you say it out loud, it actually doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound popular or even populist. Anyway, let's just finish it. So, if you're thinking about being a naughty boy or a naughty girl of dual citizenship, I guess you could just revoke your other citizenship. Look, I haven't really thought about the details. Anyway, authorised by Peter Dutton, making shit up as I go along Canberra, I guess. G'day, Lewis.
Hello, Daniel. What a delight to be with you.
I'm very excited about this episode. Big show today. We've got Emma Shortis from the Australian Institute and Senator Jacquie Lambie joining us. But before we have that conversation, a quick reminder, we've got the Irrational Fear election special, April 9th at the Melbourne Comedy Festival at the Malthouse. We've got Tom Ballard, Alice Fraser and John Delmenica, who is the editor of The Chaser, in their only Melbourne shows. We've also got Vijay Rajan and Mel McGlenzie joining us. And Lewis, I have booked in a special guest interview. Any guesses who it might be?
You were making some pretty big implications, I'll say.
Well, I'll have you know, Albo's person did say they'll get back to me. That was 3 days ago, but they didn't get back to me. Yeah. So we have booked in yourself and myself and DJ Andy McClelland. It is going to be a very fast and very fun election hour on April 9th at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. Tickets in the show.
Hopefully the election's been called by then.
Oh, it will have to have been called sometime that week, if
I'm
not
starting
a
to
couple of days
everyone's
after.
talking about whether Donald Trump's going to do a coup. Is Albo doing a coup? Is this thing just never going to get called? We'll just have Albo. We'll have the one term for 10 years.
You know what we should do is we should dress up Jonas Holt as Albo and just get him to call the election. All right, I'm recording my end of Irrational Fear on Gundungurra land. Let's start the show.
The following program contains rude words like Mark Latham, blockchain, and Twitter. Irrational Fear recommends listening by immature audiences. Comedians, experts, laughing at the world as it burns down around us. This is a Rational Fear.
Tonight, the Trump administration defunds a project tracking stolen Ukrainian kids, reallocating those funds to instead track the kids of Elon Musk. And after spending 9 months in space, Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore are back on Earth and have regrets after seeing the price of terrestrial rent. And as Albo promises to slash the price of prescriptions, the Greens lobby to change the PBS to include NANGs. It's the 21st of March, and with more consequence than the knack, this is Irrational Fear.
This is a Rational Fear.
Hello, welcome to Irrational Fear. I'm your host, former SFMU accountant Dan Illich, and this week we are talking about our special relationship with the USA. Last week you might have seen Trump. He was on a bit of a tariff spree. He was going around the world slapping tariffs and everything. He even slapped tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium. And former PM Malcolm Turnbull even called him a bully, saying that countries should stand up to him. But is it as easy as that? Australia just handed over $800 million in down payment for submarines that the USA looks like they're not really interested in giving us anymore. Will we just be another vendor begging Donald Trump to honour their contract? Well, we've got two of the smartest brains to tell us what's what. Our first guest was voted Australia's best soundbite by this very podcast. It's independent Senator from Tasmania, Jacquie Lambie. Welcome, Senator.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much for having me on.
What has been your favourite viral soundbite that's made you famous?
I think it's that Tasmanian accent, because we're very different than you mainlanders, if you haven't worked that out by now, mate. You know? So you
Sometimes I
mainlanders
can't
need to
tell
get
if you're
used
from
to
the
that.
far south or the far north.
Yeah, well, you know, we do all the heavy lifting from below. That's you mainlanders don't, you know, you mainlanders need to realise that, honestly.
Topping from the
we
bottom.
need some praise for it.
And she literally wrote the book on the Australian-US Treaty, ANZUS. She's the Director of International and Security Affairs for the Australia Institute. It's Dr. Emma Shortis. Emma, how did you know that writing a book about the fragility of ANZUS would be so popular 6 years later?
I didn't. It's wild, Dan, to have a book that I wrote 6 years ago, still be relevant. I think no author thinks that's going to happen, and it's not relevant for good reasons.
It's you and J.K. Rowling.
Oh, please.
Harsh, Lewis. That is so harsh. Folks, let's start with Jacqui. From where you sit, Jacqui, is Australia in a bit of a weak negotiating position when it comes to, tariffs and things like that? What are our main sources of power over the US?
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is that Australia's become very, very reliant on other countries, whether it's China or whether it's the US, and we seem to have lost being reliant ourselves, standing on our own 2 feet. And I would have thought going through COVID, realising that we couldn't even make hand sanitizer here and supply, enough of the face masks, that we were in serious trouble. I don't think they've taken this seriously. I think we've been getting warnings along the way, and they're just not listening up in that political field. So for me, it's just it's a real problem.
You had some big swings last week, though. You said that
Pine
basically,
Gap.
Why didn't we shut down Pine Gap?
Yeah, why don't we shut down Pine Gap? They need that. Without that, they're stuffed. We've also got their Marines up there at the top of the Northern Territory. There's nearly 3,000 of them. We could say you've got 7 or 14 days to get them out of the country. You're now showing that loyalty and mateship doesn't mean a bloody thing to you people. And quite frankly, I just think the way that they've played this by standing back. I mean, look at Mexico and Canada. They're still on the negotiating table because they went, no, stuff you can get stuffed, and we're retaliating. I know that we can't retaliate with their own tariffs. That would be ridiculous. But there are things that they need Australia for. And when you've got that Pine Gap, it is a lot. It is a lot for us on our security radar, to be honest with you, because basically we're doing it for the USA so that they can make sure that the intelligence that they're gathering, they can't get it from anywhere else over this side of the world. That's the problem with them. So you could turn that off. The thing is this, though, apparently we have to give them 12 months' notice if we decide that we're going to do that. Well, they sure as hell never gave us any notice about tariffs, and they sure as hell never gave us any notice that they're now coming for more. So we don't actually owe them anything. I think from the way that they've treated us, from the way that, we had that mateship in World War II. We followed them into Vietnam War. We didn't ask questions. We certainly didn't ask any questions about going into the Middle East for 20 years. We didn't even ask how long it was going to take in the Middle East. And we never had enough troops to maintain any more than 5 years on the ground, but we still left them in there. It's really embarrassing when you're known around the rest of the world as being the Deputy Sheriff of the United States of America. Well, this is how they treat the Deputy Sheriff, people. This is how they treat them. She's all over. So there are things that they won't do this. I just think they're using a very wrong method, and they're sending out a very, very wrong signal of lack of leadership in this country. And it's time to say, okay, this is it. Playing the nice game's not going to work here. You have a billionaire or a millionaire that you are playing with, mate, that is used to having yes people around him. So most of them are cowards because nobody ever says no to them. They never say no to them. Try saying no to those billionaires and that, mate, because I can tell you they'll go right in the face and that you can scare them as hell. So I just think they need to take a completely different tact here. They're failed with the one they've got.
Jacqui, going up against Pine Gap, you're walking the steps of sort of a Gough Whitlam. You're going to get a call from the CIA soon and a letter from the King, and you're going to be taken out of the Senate with this sort of chat. There's going to be... It's a huge call. I feel like we might need to backtrack for anyone who's listening who doesn't know much about Pine Gap. Jacqui, you're probably best placed to talk about it. For anyone who's listening who doesn't know about Pine Gap, can you give it some people like a quick summation?
Yeah, so just to put it in very simple terms, Pine Gap is we gather intelligence, the most critical intelligence for the United States of America. That's why the Chinese hate Pine Gap being here. We could turn that plug off because without Pine Gap, without having that on Australian soil, they cannot get the intelligence that they need. And that's pretty much in a nutshell.
It's very secretive. No one's allowed in there.
No one's allowed in there, and apparently the US own it, but it's on Australian soil. We had the same thing in the Indian Ocean there. There's submarines. We've got critical infrastructure in there that gathers their intelligence when those submarines are way down below. That nothing else can gather that intelligence. That intelligence gathering is the most crucial. So there are things that we can switch off here and give them a warning and just turn off the power button, to be honest with you, without doing much else.
Emma, I was just going to say, Australia is part of a large kind of apparatus of 5 nations. It's called the Five Eyes: Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, US. Surely it's misnamed. Surely it should be called 10 Eyes. But aside from that, should we be worried that, Russia is also now in the Five Eyes, given the US closeness to Putin?
Yeah, look, I think there's real concern, Dan, that, intelligence gathered through Five Eyes, gathered through Pine Gap, as Jacquie was just saying, is now vulnerable potentially to Russia because of Trump's close relationship with Russia, because a lot of the people in Trump's administration, would not pass security and background checks through their own agencies, through their own government. There is real concern about that. And there's also concern, I think, about how Trump is going to use Five Eyes. There's been noise about him threatening to kick Canada out of Five Eyes. And, I think the kind of steps that Jackie's suggesting, if Australia was to go down that path, we would have to really seriously consider what kind of backlash, we would be inviting, which is not to say that we shouldn't do it, but that we should be prepared for, what Trump might do. When he perceives that he's been slighted, when he perceives that he's been wronged, he reacts with fury. And that is something that, not just Australia, but allies across the world are having to contemplate now.
Oh, I love the idea that Canada could be booted out and we could audition for another country to take its spot. Who will be Australia's next top spy? That'll be great. Belarus, welcome.
We're just like an orphaned child looking for a new dad.
Always.
It worries me about kind of the relationship between Australia and the US, in that, like Jacquie has said, we've gone into so many wars with them. Jacquie even brought out George Bush famously calling John Howard a deputy sheriff in the Pacific. And then Joe Biden famously called Scott Morrison that fella from down under, because he definitely knew who Scott Morrison was.
Yeah, the one that doesn't hold a hose.
He's the one. Yeah, he's the hoseless guy.
The
He's
hoseless guy, mate.
5 eyes, no hose.
Emma, got a question for you. Could Australia, foreseeably under ANZUS, be forced to go into Greenland or Panama to help USA secure those territories? That sounds something like we wouldn't necessarily be in our interest.
No, I don't think it would be in our interest at all, Dan. ANZUS can't actually force us to do anything. There's this kind of mythology around ANZUS that it provides a kind of mutual security guarantee that the United States will come to our rescue if ever we need them. But it does nothing of the sort. It just promises that, the parties will act, which could mean anything at all. That could mean like sending a strongly worded letter. That's an act. So there's no guarantee there, and it's not reciprocal. Like, it doesn't require that Australia follow the United States into every war that it fights, no matter when and no matter why. But we've consistently done that, partly in order to kind of shore up that mythical security guarantee and keep the United States close to us, keep it in our region. That's why part of the reason the Australian government went to Vietnam. It wasn't necessarily that we had to be invited. We offered before we were even asked. And that's been historically consistent.
The word is like might act. Is that the phrase? What's
there's an agreement that parties will, if one or the other is threatened, that parties will act. So there's no like NATO-like security guarantee. Not that means anything anymore, but there isn't a commitment from the United States.
Well, Australia's got some of the best actors in the world. We'll just get Kate Blanchett down on the front lines. Emma, as in your role, how do you see as Australia's Defence Force, being in a position that, may have to face kind of conflict in the next 5 or 6 years?
Look, I think the thing I would say, Dan, is that ANZUS and Australian foreign policy generally kind of assumes that conflict and war is inevitable, and in doing so kind of makes conflict more likely. So I think, part of what we need to do, and part of what Trump is prompting, is rethinking, how we think about security and what makes us safer. And the AUKUS submarine deal in particular is in the spotlight because I think there's a growing sense that wouldn't make us safer. That is an extraordinary transfer, the biggest transfer of sovereign wealth in Australian history for some submarines that we're never going to get. How could we better spend eye-watering amounts of money like that on things that would make us safer? So I don't think it's necessarily that the Australian Defence Force is depleted. The question is, moving forward, what is going to make us safer? What are we going to need? And spending $368 billion plus. Of course, this is a defence budget, so we've got to remember that that's probably not going to be the amount. It's probably going to be significantly more than that. On submarines that aren't going to appear will inevitably leave Australia exposed, especially if in the process we're tying ourselves ever closer to Trump's version of the United States and Trump's version of global security, which is a pretty scary prospect.
The AUKUS deal was always a bad deal. And now with Trump doing his mud deal, it was always a bad deal anyway. It was always going to be difficult.
Telling me Scott Morrison made a bad deal, Jacquie.
Yeah, that's right.
Scott Morrison.
But do you know what's
Al
even
Scott.
worse? Is Labor picked up the bad deal and went, yeah, we're good with this. And none of them have got the balls to say, that's it, we'll just give you the check and we'll just keep moving on with this. Check for what?
It's wild. It's wild to have it so far away and already they're going, yeah, we're probably not going to give it to you. And we're like, oh, really?
Yeah, I
Here's the
wonder
money.
if they've asked for their check back yet. Because I would have said, given the damn check back, I would have done that to start with and they wouldn't have even asked for that.
How do you actually move $800 million in sovereign funds? Do you print it out?
PayPal, anything that gives Elon a little...
No. I've heard it's a check. It's actually a check and we can cancel it. And they still haven't had the courage to cancel the damn thing. They're still old school
actually
in the
a
US.
check.
Wow.
It's a check, baby.
It's just a check.
Oh, my
wow.
God. The US is so archaic in the way it handles money.
I
They
think
should have
Elon
sent it all
Musk
in
is onto that.
Dogecoin.
Yeah. Did you see that this is a bit of a tangent, but did you see when Trump had all of Musk's Teslas on the White House lawn the other day and he said he was going to buy one? And Donald Trump's like, and they're like, well, how are you going to buy it? He goes, I'll pay check. And I'm like, I know this isn't the weirdest part of what's going on, but you guys are still using checks. It's 2025.
I find it more amazing. I didn't think Donald Trump could actually drive. But anyway, okay.
His fingers can't go over the wheel.
He's not allowed to. Yeah, he's a dangerous bloke, that one. Yeah, don't let him on the road. Don't let him on the road.
The president
Too many
gets
lanes
driven
in
around.
America.
So.
I saw that he got into the car and was like, oh, yeah, there's so much computer. Everything's computer.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, I mean, the other thing about AUKUS now is we've pulled out of the French deal. Most people, I think, certainly plenty of people are saying we should pull out of this one because it just doesn't look like it's ever going to happen anyway. Well, where to from here? We go back to France, beret in hand?
I don't know, but we've already spent $4 billion and we've got an empty brown paper bag, so I don't see how that's a great political deal whatsoever with taxpayers' money.
Crazy.
It means like another decade of delay before we get submarines. But Emma, you say that, these subs aren't going to appear. It strikes me that that's exactly what subs should do, not appear. and maybe it's actually a good thing that we just buy these.
We're getting the
All
Emperor's
about
new
camouflage.
subs.
We could just tell everyone that we've bought the subs. The USA could tell everyone they've given us the subs. The subs never appear, and we just tell everybody that we've got the subs, and
The
you better
Chinese
watch out.
government is so confused. They're like, what technology are they using? We can't find them anywhere. There's hundreds of them apparently.
I want to know broader implications, Emma. This is probably a question for you. What does it look like for fragility of other organizations like the Quad? All these groups have got, like, it seems to me whenever there's any kind of potential conflict on the rise, groups of countries get together and they form another country to muscle up on an aggressor. G5, G7, G20, AUKUS, Five Eyes, the Quad. It's like a terrible spin-off of
E12.
MCU movies. Yeah, so the Quad is India, Japan, Australia, and the US. Does the Quad actually exist in reality?
Not really, Dan. The Quad was always a weird construction, a weird kind of, it was originally framed as an alliance of democracies, and India kind of complicated that, and now, of course, the United States is complicating that as well. And so the Quad was always this kind of mythical beast, designed always, of course, to counter China, as a show of strength against China. And so the potential for the Quad to fall apart, I know.
I really like that. I really like Australia. I really like the US and India saying, look out, autocracy. We've got democracies coming for you. And then they were like, actually, democracy sucks. We've got to turn ourselves into autocracies.
Yeah, just had a little rethink there. And of course, India and all members of the Quad are always going to pursue their own interests. So the Quad was always an artificial construction. Trump might find it useful. You know, he likes those kind of photo-op-y symbolic things with powerful world leaders, so he might want to continue it in that way. But I don't think anybody, you know, except those individual countries necessarily invested much or took the Quad that seriously. But that doesn't mean that other multilateral organisations are dead or that they can't survive after US abandonment. I think we've seen, you know, in Europe and potentially in the Pacific as well, a recognition that, you know, the United States is abandoning that role, but also that it may not have played the leadership role that we imagined it to have in the past anyway, and that actually, you know, multilateral climate organisations might be able to move past that US abandonment and actually begin to achieve things. So Trump is absolutely upending the world order, but it's also possible that he's doing it in maybe in unexpected ways.
You talk about multilateral organisations. Are they largely distractions in a way to project power? Because I have real struggle running like several Facebook groups. So do nations, when they join a multilateral organisation, like use up resources where resources could otherwise be effectively deployed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Elsewhere?
Like I think we see there's nowhere where that's more clear than at the climate organisations, at the big COP meetings, you know, where thousands of people descend on a place and spend, you know, weeks arguing over where a full stop goes rather than actually achieving anything. Yep. And that is absolutely a problem with those multilateral organisations. But they do also achieve things. And I think, you know, in the face of Trump's assault on the international rule of law, Australia has to consider really carefully how we respond. And I think that's part of the logic behind, you know, not engaging in reciprocal tariffs, because that would, you know, shadow what's left of Australia's commitment to the international rule of law. And the consequences of that are really significant. So continuing to engage in those multilateral organisations, you know, as flawed as they are, of course they're flawed, but at the moment that's the best thing we have. And maybe the United States being out of the climate negotiations, for example, will result in them being more productive, because often the US has been the one that's the drag on those organisations.
That's super interesting.
For us to just fuse with New Zealand. Like, we just got to get a little bit, we got to, obviously we're already friends, but like, let's pool our resources. Let's get together with them.
We're in Tasmania. Imagine having Tasmania included, the three of us, mate. We'd be a weapon of destruction, honestly. God forbid, that'll scare the bejesus out of them. That's the one. That's the answer.
Jacqui, can I ask you a question? You're talking about people not standing up to Trump. Kevin Rudd's the ambassador to the US at the moment. Do you have a review on Kevin Rudd? And if it wasn't Kevin, do you have a dream ambassador?
Oh, look, I think for a dream ambassador over there, well, he needs a good, feisty, fiery woman, sweetheart. He needs a Jacquie Lambie in his face.
Jacquie Lambie auditioning for the job post politics.
Tasmanian roadkill and see if he can handle that out of the slow cooker. Yeah, that's what's going on. That's a great idea. I've got it under control. At least I've got answers. Unlike the other dummies down there, they're like, oh, my God, this is all brand new. What do we do here? Oh, my God. It's a bloody comedy circus up there, mate. I've never seen anything like it. That's what it's like. It's like, oh, my God, because there's no adaptability with politicians. So when something as big as this happens, they become comatose. And this is the biggest threat actually Australia has, that these politicians have got no way how to deal with it, and they become very comatose. And I think that's the worst situation we can be in. Start making some decisions.
So, Jacqui, in your view, like, if we lessen our reliance for the US on our defence, what's the next step for Australia, do you think?
Well, I think Australia right now is in is this the most amazing time where we've just been through a Royal Commission to rebuild our military, and that we actually do it properly, and we stop wasting so much on procurement, because the amount of waste that goes in there, as you would know, Emma, is spectacular. And that, you know, we don't need these fancy submarines. What we need is we need missiles, drones and robotics, because that's what'll be leading in future wars. I don't see in 20 years' time that you'll have boots on the ground. I see robotics being out there. I really do. It's nearly like Terminator. Honestly, if we can have microwaves after Michael J. Fox 10 years later, then how long is it going to be before we are fighting with these things? And I think that's the technology that's open, that's not being explored enough. I think you could spend a lot on tech and science in this country and get ahead, and there's gaps there, and we're not using that. I know those young kids out there, they really want to have a shot at this sort of stuff, to pioneer all this sort of stuff. We're not giving them that. We're not throwing them at that money. There's great minds here in Australia, in those young kids, and we're not using their full ability. And I think that's really shameful.
I understand that Australian companies are supplying heaps of like drones to the Ukraine war, for instance, but our defence aren't procuring similar kind of technology from those companies?
No, they're not. How embarrassing is that these guys are making some of the best technology, even in Tasmania. And we are exporting that to every other defence organisation around the world. That's what we're doing, but we're not using our own. And this comes down to those bloody primes. They're the top dogs that have taken over basically in the last 10 or 15 years. So politicians say, oh, that's not really our problem, that's the prime. The prime picks out who it's going to pick up. Instead of telling those primes that, 50% or whatever procurement, you'll be picking that up from Australian manufacturing. They never put any of those requirements on them. Those primes are not Australian. They're German primes, American primes, English primes. We don't have our own priming. They're the guys at the top they're the top of the headquarters, and they say, we're going to go out there and we're going to find what we need in this country and make sure it's made. They have no interest in Australia. They're only interested about profits, and that's all they give a shit about.
Lewis, it strikes me that podcasting has been incredibly unprofitable for us, and maybe we should become a weapons manufacturer. And I think a weapons manufacturer called A Rational Fear, the branding's already done with us for us.
It's really good. Sorry, Jacqui, you might have to excuse my ignorance. Can you explain primes to me?
Okay, so primes are like a big corporation. Like you've got Boeing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Raytheon.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
Just
Raytheon, those
major
people
weapons
thing, all right, they're
manufacturers.
big primes. So that's taken
Gotcha.
a lot of the decision-making out from the politicians because they don't make good
Okay.
decisions either. But the waste that goes on, I'm sure Emma could go on about this, the waste. There's nothing for, we just sent $1 billion check, US $1 billion check or 1.2 billion US money. 800 million in our money over to the US without even any thought process to that, without backing it up, without asking questions. We're just giving them money
we don't
for
get
nothing.
the deposit back if we don't
That's
get
what
the
we're doing.
submarines.
And we don't get a deposit back. It's like the French, we didn't get our deposit back. Do we have to pay them out in the end, Emma, too, just because we muck them around? And then we've spent how many billions of dollars? Is it $2 or $4 billion in UK shipyards that we haven't put any in our own?
This is the perfect company for us, Lewis. We start a company, promise a bunch of stuff, then
Rational
convince
Fear's
another
great.
company.
We've already got the
then
brand.
keep the
We've got
deposit.
Jacqui Lambie
We
sitting
keep
here.
the
We've got
deposit.
Fear as hell
And
out
then
there,
not only
baby.
that,
It's
under
coming.
AUKUS, if they sell us stuff that doesn't work or isn't fit for purpose, we've indemnified them. So it's on us.
Yes, that's right. It's on us. It's really. But this is what I mean. When we do trade deals, they know better. We always come out second best. So much for putting the nation first. I think Trump is showing an example that you've got to put your nation first. So maybe they may want to start doing that down here. But I'll tell you what, the groundswell out there with what's going on with Trump, there's not a great deal of supporters here in Australia. I can assure you of that much.
We hear you, Jacqui. Tasmania first. Tasmania first.
Tasmania's always first, darling. That's the way it is.
Jacqui, can I ask one thing that obviously over the last few weeks with all of the sort of the Chinese live fire thing that's been happening, Dutton's been trying to whip up a bunch of fear that we're, getting invaded by China and Labor aren't doing anything about it. It always strikes me when this happens that I do not put my hand up as a foreign policy expert, but I do not understand why China would invade us or would ever invade us. Am I wrong or are they wrong, or in your opinion?
Well, we thought we'd always be best mates with the United States of America too, but that was gone in about a split second. You don't have to worry about China now because they come down to Tasmania. I obviously took a boat out and talked to them on the submarine and they won't be coming back, so we're good now. Tasmania's fixed that.
Thank you, Jacqui. Thank you on behalf of a grateful nation.
That's okay. I'll let the Tasmanian people know.
Emma, what about you? Is Lewis right here?
The first thing I would say, Lewis, is part of the problem with foreign policy in this country is that people feel like they can't talk about it, that they're not allowed to talk about it unless they're experts because it's so secretive and you can only talk about it if you've got access to all this secret information. That's not true. Everybody has a right to talk about how Australia behaves in the world, and that's one of the good things, as Jacqui was saying about Trump, is that people are talking about it more. That's a really positive thing. I think, with China, there are undoubtedly risks to be managed with that relationship, with Australia's relationship with China. The real danger, I think, is when Australia assumes that our interests align with the United States when it comes to China, because that's just not true. We have a really different relationship with China and often underestimate our own diplomatic ability and our own power. You know, Australia is not a small country. We're the 13th biggest economy in the world, and we can build really strong relationships. But what we do when we tie ourselves to Trump's version of America, which sees China as an existential threat, which sees conflict with China as inevitable, that puts us in a great deal of danger, and also is deeply provocative, you know, to align ourselves with Trump, to engage in AUKUS, to buy, you know, mythical submarines that are not for the defence of the Australian continent. They're designed to go really, really far from the Australian continent, and they are directed at China. Everybody knows that, even though, you know, that's not how it's described. Those, you know, so often in Australia we talk about our relationship with China as if what we do doesn't matter and how what we do is perceived doesn't matter. But of course it matters. But it's so important to remember that conflict is not inevitable. Conflict with China is not inevitable. We can manage that relationship really successfully and make it really productive and deep and broad. But that means having some independence from the United States, and particularly from what Donald Trump is doing.
Well, thank you both for your brains and your insight, and Jacqui, your service on a submarine recently.
You're very welcome. I'll let Tasmanians know that. But we have fixed that situation there, Emma. You can rewrite your book. Tasmanians have intervened, and China's hearing us loud and clear over.
I think I read Emma's book when it came out a few years ago, but one of the things that struck me was that it's called ANZUS, but New Zealand left ANZUS ages ago because they were like, fuck this shit, America's unreliable.
So now it's just...
Kiwis being smarter than the rest of
Yeah, so
that says
you
it
can't,
all,
yeah,
mate. That says it all.
That's right, so it's now anus. Big thank you to Senator Jacquie Lambie and Dr. Emma Shortis from the Australia Institute. Also, big thanks to Road Mics and our Patreon supporters for making this podcast possible. Also, shout out to Jacob Brown on the Teppanyaki timeline. Big thank you for everyone for joining us. Do you want to plug anything? Emma, do you want to plug anything before we roll?
Yeah, I've got a new essay coming out from the Australia Institute. It's called After America. It'll be out in May.
Terrific. Jacqui, what would you like to plug?
I want to plug beautiful Glenn Colomets, who's running on the Senate ticket, New South Wales, for you guys. Give him a vote. He's a former veteran. He helps out veterans pro bono. He does all that. He's a wonderful man, married to a GP, so he understands all that, and has two teenage kids growing up. So what Glenn doesn't know is not worth knowing, I can assure you.
Terrific. Lewis Hover, what are you plugging?
Nothing for me this week, Dan. Come and see us at the Comedy Festival.
Yes, please do. And I'll be down in Tasmania, in your neck of the woods, Jacqui, on Sunday night, hosting No Safe Seat. So look after that one. Big thanks, everyone, joining us.